Hello, hello. Welcome to episode 10 of From the North. Can you believe it, Elu? We've made it this far.
10 episodes, guys. Thank you so much for sticking around with us. How's it going, Hen?
Seriously. It's going okay. Well, Elu and I are riled up for this episode, should we say. A lot of things have happened over the last week, but we're basically going to be focusing on two different elections, one real, one fake, but both with consequences, fair and not fair. So let's dive right into it.
Before we start, though, I do want to mention it's funny how we mentioned in the last episode that there was not a lot of things going on and we didn't have anything to talk about. We actually have too many things to talk about now. But we're going to be focusing, as Hermione said, on two elections that have very big, very real repercussions for Hispanics overall.
Absolutely.
So get us started, Hermione. What happened in America?
So, it's funny because this really relates to what we were talking about in the last episode, which is that many people like you and I, liberals, feel that the progressive movement is taking a lot of things too far and that they're not really helping what's supposed to be, our common goal that's pro civil rights, pro minority rights, etc. So we had an election. Was it on Tuesday? I don't remember. A local election this week. And the big news was in Virginia because where there was a Democratic governor, there was elections to replace him, and the Republican candidate won. So a lot of people have seen this, as kind of a pulse, getting a pulse on what's going on in the country and what's going to happen in the midterms. Obviously, the country is going through a lot of really hard things. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. The job numbers continue to struggle. We're dealing with inflation, all those things. But then the takes happened. This always happens, when Democrats lose an election, and particularly the focus on minority voters. And we're going to talk about Hispanic voters now because, Democrats feel that Hispanics are automatically going to vote for the Democrat candidate no matter what. So once they didn't, actually, the Hispanic voters voted in record numbers for the Republican candidate. And this is a state that went for Biden. It's important noting this. So we saw a lot of voters, including a lot of Hispanic voters, that went from voting for President Biden to then voting for the Republican candidate to be their governor. So Edu, what started happening when the results came in?
Well, initially, at least, it was a big surprise, at least for the people that I follow that were following these elections.
By the way, it shouldn't have been. I want to know who you followed because it was not a big surprise.
Wasn't it a big surprise? Like, it was a big, like, if you would ask people 6 months ago who was going to win in Virginia, not a lot of people would have said the Republican candidate.
Maybe some months ago, but like I said,
Yeah.
things have started getting harder in this country. There's also the issue of what was going on in the schools, Elu, that we haven't touched on this show because it's so delicate. The issue surrounding critical race theory being taught in schools. That has also created a whole new layer to this. And the last stunt that the Lincoln Project did,
Oh
we
my
have to
God.
mention that because that did piss people off. So in the last week of campaigning, the Lincoln Project, which is a group that says they are conservative but were against Biden, against Trump, and helped elect Biden. Well, they decided to get 6 Democratic workers, they work for the Democratic Party, and stand outside the bus campaign for the Republican candidate pretending to be KK members with torchlights and everything. And then it came out that it was actually Democrats doing it. So
Yeah.
needless to say, that did not help the Democratic candidate.
It did not, and yeah, the results are in, and obviously the Republican candidate, Junkin, I think it's his name, has been elected
Youngkin,
as the governor of Virginia. So
who, by the way, Elo, we have to say, I'm sorry, this Republican candidate did not have Trump's support. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump had said some terrible things about him and had not campaigned for him. So again, we want to make a distinction between the conservative people that should be allowed in the political process and the Trump movement.
For sure, definitely two kinds of people in the conservative caucus at the moment. It is my hope that normal conservatives can take back their leadership in the GOP, leaving the Trump and the Trump years and the Trumpism behind. I don't know what's gonna happen, but back to the topic at hand. Once the results started coming in, yes, one of the big things that was noticeable is that if people follow the predictions of the most progressive, let's say, politicians and members of the Democratic Party, Hispanics should be voting Democrat. And if they don't vote Democrat, there's something wrong with the Hispanics. But is it really that there's something wrong with the Hispanics that they're not voting Democrat? Or maybe there's a reason why an individual will not like to vote for your party other than being racist. But I don't know, there's no nuance, obviously, so the take was that, oh, well, if more Latins and more Hispanic peoples are voting red, then that means that Hispanic peoples are therefore more racist, more internalized white supremacy or whatever.
What was the term? Internalized white supremacy. We started seeing, all these takes from the progressive leaders of this country, including one tweet, I don't remember her name, Jamila, something that said, you shouldn't be shocked that a Republican was elected in Virginia because Americans just love white supremacy. And then you turn on MSNBC, once again, all these white people trying to figure out what's going on with the Hispanic vote, of course, without a Hispanic panelist allowed to say anything or anywhere in sight. And if they are allowed in sight, they are going to repeat the talking point that the white man wants them to say, the white progressive men, which is, Hispanics have a problem with internalized white supremacy.
It's never their fault. Like, it's if they put out a very progressive strategy for the elections, that they put out very progressive candidates and people didn't vote for them, it's not because their work was not as good. It's because the voters are not smart enough. And it's easy when you want to pinpoint it to a very specific group of voters, because that's just how populism rolls. You gotta find an enemy. In this case, the enemies of the left, for the elections of Virginia at least, seems to have been Hispanics that shifted conservative. And
it's crazy how all of this progressivism and anti-racism doesn't apply to the Hispanic community, aka the largest minority in this country. I mean, we were seeing openly racist takes, and this brings us to the color palette released by Pew Research. While mainstream media is theorizing that Hispanics are going Republican because they're racist, Pew publishes a chart of different skin tones that Hispanics have and the percentage, which of course shows that most Hispanics are white. So we're seeing a narrative being built. And this has been happening, Edu, since 2020, when they were wondering why Cubans and Venezuelans were voting Republican, while people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, and the Squad are voting against what we care about, Hispanics in Florida. So the Squad also this week voted against the Renacer Act to support the Nicaraguan opposition. They voted against a simple resolution that did nothing, which was simply to say the U.S. Congress stands in support of Cubans who want to protest later this month and are being jailed, exiled, beaten up by the Cuban regime. Well, the Squad, the Socialist Squad, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they couldn't do that much.
And it extends to what they did after with that. The Congress also voted on a resolution similar to the Cuban resolution to support the opposition and the people of Nicaragua. And we're going to talk about that later today with our guest. Today marks a very grim day for the world, for the Americas, and for Latin America specifically. With what's going on in Nicaragua, the Squad also voted against supporting the people in Nicaragua. And then, just to put the cherry on top, after weeks, I wouldn't say weeks, probably months of negotiating the infrastructure bill, the Biden infrastructure bill, which is a trillionaire program to invest in much needed infrastructure in the country, something that a lot of conservatives actually agree with, something that most moderates actually agree with. It turns out that in favor of this bill, we saw a big important number of conservative candidates voting in favor of Biden's bill, but we also saw the same squad that technically belongs to the same party as Joe Biden voting against it. So it's just a cycle of repeating and repeating and repeating, that every time that we have a bill that needs to pass, regardless of the topic that it is, if it's put on by the conservatives, obviously the squad is going to vote no, regardless of what it is. And if it's put up by the moderate Democrats, they're also going to vote no, because their whole strategy is to be contrarian to the political discourse. That's how they get points.
They're also socialist, so they don't believe in reforming anything. They don't believe in progress by reform. They want to break it all down, burn it all down, and only allow their ideologically pure legislation according to them. So if this bill didn't have every single thing they wanted, they were not going to support it, even though it was put up by their party, even though it is progressive legislation.
And that's a big point that you're mentioning, reform versus revolution. Those are the two ways that citizens have of changing the status quo when the status quo is obviously not working. If you are a congressperson, if you were elected to speak on behalf of your people, to reform the country, because that's what a congressperson does, reform, why are you acting like a revolutionary?
And that's what you do in a democracy. You have to come to an agreement with those that are your opposites politically.
But no.
That's why they don't really support democracy, and that's where the danger is.
But no, it's easier to, instead of acknowledging this, it's easier to find someone to blame and throw the blame at it. And now it just happens to be us, well, not us, but Hispanics and Latins in general living in North America, sorry. And it brings me back to the Pew chart that we were just talking about. We should put that on the screen at some point.
Oh yeah, no, we have to do it now. Hello, shade number 2-3. When I'm 10, sometimes I could be a 5-6. So I guess when I'm like a 2-3, I'm not a minority. But then when I'm 10 and I move to a 5-ish, then I get to be a minority. What about you, Edu? I'm confused.
I'm a number 1 because I don't have enough melanin living in Canada. But another point of that chart and that research that Pew did that's very concerning. It's not only basing or dividing Latinos or Hispanics based on our skin color, which I shouldn't tell you guys if you're Hispanic, but it's a proof that they don't understand how racial relationships work south of the border, because it doesn't work like that. But they also went further and had something like they were asking people what color palette they identify themselves with, and they actually calculated somehow if the people were overestimating how lighter they are or underestimating how light skin or dark skin they are. So this is not
only that, Edu, then they connected that to support of Trump. And then we see the whole narrative come full circle. The study says that the whiter a Latino perceives him or herself, the more likely they are to be a Trump supporter.
And this is horrible. This is not like a random study that was done and was just put out there. By the way that it's made, by the way that you're asking Hispanics the color of the skin, who they voted for, if they're lighter, if they're darker, it's clear that you wanted to prove your own point. It's clear that you wanted to give people more weapons to use against the Hispanics. And that's evil. That shit shouldn't be allowed. It's not allowed in a lot of countries, in fact. But somehow it is okay for the progressives to do it. Somehow it is okay for the progressives to be actively racist against Hispanic people, being a lot of them themselves Hispanic. Shit's fucked. That's absolutely fucked, and that shouldn't happen, and we need to call this out. We already have enough hatred, enough racism coming from the far right to allow the far left to get away with it as well.
Edu, if the Pew Research Center had published a study by white academics that showed a color chart for African Americans, I cannot tell you how scandalous that would have been.
But somehow it's fine to do it with Hispanics.
I don't understand. People, sadly, there's a huge gap between first generation Americans of Hispanic descent and those Hispanics like me and Edu who kind of immigrated to the first world, let's say. And I saw a lot of the first generation Americans of Hispanic descent confused as to why people like me and Edu were upset by this chart. They were like, it's just academic research.
It's not.
This is done all the time on how race affects life experience and how skin tone affects experience. So
it is offensive because the whole purpose of this research is to prove a point. This wasn't that. So you can interpret any research from two perspectives. You can look at our research, see the results, reach a conclusion, and move on. Or you can have a thesis, a hypothesis, and then do your research to confirm or deny your hypothesis. The problem with this research in particular is that it's clearly done in favor of proving one point. It's not very, if you read it, it's not very scientific to go with a palette color around and asking people how they identify themselves. That's not how science is done, but nevertheless, you get results, you extrapolate the results to prove your conclusion, and then you shoot that out to the world to give more guns to the intolerant progressives that just want a scientific reason.
By the way, because we have been dealing with this progressive racism for a while, because every time we try to speak against the dictators in Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, we get white first worlders telling us that by our Twitter picture, we look too white to be real Venezuelans, quotes.
Not only that, I've been told that I'm not really Venezuelan because I speak English, as if people in other countries are not smart enough to learn a new language. It's not like English is the most important language in the world and every school in the world is teaching you English. It's sad, it's ignorant, but what pisses me off, and it pisses me off a lot more than, for example, when you have like a neo-Nazi being a racist, is because neo-Nazis are not hiding it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like conservatives, as much as some try to hide it, they're obviously not hiding their racism. The conservatives that are racist, obviously, I'm not talking about all conservatives. But the progressives take it further. Not only they don't acknowledge their racism, they're proud of it. And they try to support it with as much research and extrapolation as they want to get to support this reason. This is not that much
research. How now they're saying, for example, now there's a progressive group saying that tests like the SAT are racist. What does that mean?
What does that even mean? And let's talk about, you know who are obsessed with research to prove their race was superior than another, or to prove that their race was bad? The fucking Nazis. You know who did research? The fucking Nazis. Did they prove anything about social Darwinism? No, they didn't, because social Darwinism, it's fucked and it's fake. Well, so it is your progressive point that Latin Americans are somehow white supremacists, which, listen to this. Hispanics are white supremacists. Are you stupid? You're not stupid. That's what pisses me off. They know that that's not the case, but they want to push that narrative because it serves to their political agenda. That's populism 101.
Absolutely. And of course, we're going to point out the Hispanic community has problems with racism like every other community in the history of the world. We're not exempt from colorism, racism. However, the way we experience it is completely different than how it is experienced in the first world, because our history is different. The way we mixed, it's different. It's a whole other box and a whole other problem that's not going to fit into the progressive identity politics war that's developing in this country.
And I think that's the slippery slope of the first, second, and third generation Americans that have Hispanic descent. Obviously, if you are born and raised in America, born and raised to the American education system, you are gonna understand race from the perspective of the United States.
Totally.
And it's very important to understand how race and racism and slavery and discrimination and all those horrible things that we're still suffering from today to this day have shaped the history of the United States. But do not extrapolate that to Latin America. Talk to your parents. Read about Latin America. Our racial relations from the 500 years ago when we were colonized by the Spanish, they were completely different to what the British and the French were doing up here in North America. The way that we have evolved our racial relationships is completely different. As Anamani says, we do have a big problem with racism. And I will put it even further. We have gone into a weird point where we have mixed racism with classism, which is a whole different Pandora box that I don't want to open today, maybe for a different episode. But it's not the same as to what's going on in the United States. And when you try to extrapolate what's happening in the States or what has happened in the United States to racial relations in Latin America, you're just being ignorant. Furthermore, when you use this ignorance to try to tell a Hispanic person that they're stupid, that they're white supremacists, that they're whatever, because they're not voting for the candidate of your like, you're only pushing them far to the other side, my bro. People don't want to hear this shit. How is a sane Hispanic person gonna vote for the Democratic Party, for example, if the Democratic Party supports the squad that's constantly telling us that we're a piece of shit, that we're racist, that we're white supremacists, obviously all of that bullshit. So it's not a winning strategy. If anything, it's a losing strategy. But the ones that are being hurt here are not the progressives. They still have their votes secure in New York. They still have their votes in Oregon. They still have their votes in LA. And they're still gonna get their 6, 7, 8 Congress people elected every single election. The ones that are being hurt by this, it's the mainstream Democratic Party. Because the mainstream Democratic Party actually takes the L's provoked by the progressives.
But of course they are to blame in this, Edu. They need to, because this is what I always say. So to wrap this up, yes, Hispanics, and not only Hispanics, African Americans and other minorities are leaving the Democratic Party, and it's not because of self-hatred. It's not because of internalized white supremacy. It's because they care about other issues other than their identity. Can you believe it? Minorities care about the economy?
Wait. So you tell me that reducing everything to race, it's not an appropriate policy? Oh my God!
Minorities care about the economy, and they care about foreign policy. They care in South Florida about Congress supporting protesters in Cuba, for example, or in Nicaragua, or in Venezuela. So it's easier for this progressive wing, who immediately started blaming election laws on that the Democratic candidate wasn't progressive enough and that minorities are actually white supremacists. It's easier to just say that than to look at the people who voted against the Renacer Act, against support for Cuban protesters, against the infrastructure deal that allows our government to continue working. Minorities and every other, just like every other American, wants a government that works for them, not that's only virtue signaling and voting no to every legislation that doesn't immediately transform this country into the socialist utopia that they desire. Because guess what? Immigrants, particularly, and Hispanics are capitalist as hell because we have seen the alternative. So even though the Democratic Party is not socialist and it's still ruled by moderates, it doesn't help when you make the face of this party people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Just because she's Hispanic, you think she's going to reach our community? Absolutely not. When she's supporting the dictators of the countries we come from.
And I'm gonna go even further. I know that I said this like 5 times in the episode, but I like where this is going. If you are Hispanic, if you're Latin American, and even if you're not, it is basic understanding that our cultures tend to be more socially conservatives than other cultures, like North America, like European culture. And that's normal. It's just our background. I'm not a conservative person. Like, if anything, I might be too liberal. And same thing for Hermione. Hermione is not conservative either. But coming from where we come from, we can understand that Hispanics, there's more to Hispanics than just being political tools for the left or for the right. We have our own concerns when it comes to voting. We care about fiscally conservative policies. Some of us care about social programs. Some of us...
Guess what? We're not just, cleaning ladies and store attendants. There are some rich Hispanics that don't want to pay high taxes.
There's many things. We are, and I can't believe I have to say this, but dear white friends, dear black friends, dear American friends, you have to understand that we Latinos, we're not dumb. We're individuals, and we care about the things that everyone cares about when it comes to going to polls and voting. If anything, this result should tell the Democratic Party where they are failing to reach our community, and where they need to work at to make sure that Latinos are not voting Republican more and more. I do believe, and this is my personal opinion, that the Democratic Party serves the interest of Hispanic peoples more than the Republican Party does. But if you keep victim shaming the Hispanics, if you keep treating them as racist, as inferior, as not as intellectual as you are, then people are not gonna vote for you. And I cannot blame a single Hispanic American for not voting for you. You deserve this. You deserve this. You deserve this. And it's time for the Democratic Party to kind of realize you guys have a problem with your progressive guys, and you need to fix it.
And I hope they rectify and they realize that what's in New York and California, it has nothing to do with what goes down in the rest of the country. And like Edu said, in this country, there are 2 options of political parties. I feel more of an independent right now, but usually I do end up having to vote for the Democratic candidate. So it's a matter of survival here. We saw the Republican Party going crazy. We cannot let the same thing happen to the Democratic Party and get lost to the extremes. So if I was a liberal Democrat politician right now, I would be strongly standing against this progressive wing that is just as racist and as problematic and as obstructionist as the Tea Party was or is, or so there's that.
So, and the other thing, and I think this can serve as a segue into our interview, is what is going on geopolitically in Latin America in general, right? Specifically, obviously talking about Nicaragua, but Nicaragua is just the latest of many, many, many of these situations where you will have most mainstream American politicians either not caring about it, or if they do care, it's mostly lip service. But then you will also have the progressive that they go out of their way to be supporters and be the #1 fans of this regime. And this is not in these regimes. And it's not only that something that only happens to US politics. This happens to Canadian politics. It happened to UK politics, European politics. It seems that this new pink progressive wave, as much as they say that they love democracy and that they love freedom and that they care about the people, then I wonder, why are you guys sending so many of your own people to support Maduro, to support Diaz-Canel, to support Ortega? Why are there so many fucking Americans today doing bourgeois tourism in Nicaragua as international observers, which they're not? Why is the DSA sending people to Venezuela? The DSA, the same organization that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and most of the squad belong to.
And people really want to give them the benefit of the... I mean, every time I speak against AOC or Ilhan Omar and Cori Bush, who are members of the DSA, you know, my progressive first-generation Americans of Hispanic descent tell me, no, but she doesn't really support that. Then why is she in the DSA? And in Congress, why does she vote against freedom in these countries?
Why don't
it's not that hard.
If she's not, you know, if they're not supporting what the DSA is doing, why are they not condemning that? Why are you voting against the people of Cuba and the people of Nicaragua in Congress? You guys know. Both of us know why you're not doing it. So why are you keep lying to the people? Why do you keep lying to the people? And to my progressive friends, why are you eating their bullshit? Why?
They're not talking about Norway, progressive friends. I promise you.
It's not. It's just a matter of seeing what they have to say. It's just a matter of looking at the real situations as to the policies that these guys are trying to push into the United States, how these policies have negative effects all over the world for at least 150 years, ever since that little piece of shit of Karl Marx decided to write his goddamn book. And he keeps failing, and he keeps going south, and at the same time you're telling people that you want to be like Norway, like Denmark, like Scandinavia, like Europe, like Canada, but instead of applying the economic policies or just the general policies that these countries have applied, which by the way are very market friendly, are very capitalistic in nature, then you're not gonna get anywhere. Because you know that that's not your plan. You know that you don't want Norway. You know that you don't want Denmark. You know that you want Venezuela. And you're not out there supporting the Danish government. You're not out there supporting the Swedish government. You're out there supporting Ortega. Yeah. You're out there supporting Maduro. Sorry, I'm yelling a lot. I'm just estoy arrecho.
So yeah, now we're going to talk about it's finally the day of the fake election in Nicaragua that we have been warning you about for weeks. So it's messed up because today, analysts agree, is the day that Nicaragua officially becomes the third dictatorship of our region. So of course they're going to join their friends in the Venezuelan regime and their friends in the Cuban regime to form the three dictatorships of the region. Of course, they're going to do this, as we have told you guys, the way modern dictators do it, which is by going through fake elections. The Ortega-Muriillo regime jailed all political opponents. They banned all opposing parties. They have even gone against dissidents in exile. And today they are going through their sham elections with the classic first world idiots that are there to say, yes, we are observing the elections and they are free. But of course, Ortega didn't even allow international press to go into the country. They actually didn't even allow Nicaraguan journalists who are from Nicaragua but work in other countries. They tried to go back to Nicaragua to cover the elections today, Sunday, which is when we're recording, and they were not allowed. The Washington Post correspondent was not even allowed inside the country. But of course, the tankies are there and they have their little vests to make them seem official, and they will come back to the United States to tell people who have suffered from the Nicaraguan dictatorship that they are lying and that Nicaragua is a democracy because they were just at the elections.
This feels personal to me and to you and to all Venezuelans because
it's the same playbook.
It's literally the same playbook that we've been through. And yes, even though agreeing with Germania, most political analysts are saying that today is the day that Nicaragua can officially be called a dictatorship. If you've been paying attention, it has been going on for a while because, surprise, surprise, dictatorships don't happen from one day to the other, especially when you're coming from a democratic country. It's a process, it's a spectrum where you're very democratic and you're suddenly not, and you're less and less and less until you actually become a dictatorship. This is what is happening, unfortunately, today in Nicaragua, and we'll talk about that in a bit with our guest. But it's also what happened in Venezuela, where, yes, you could say that Venezuela has been a dictatorship officially since 2015, after the elections of the National Assembly, when the government decided to simply rule without a Congress, because that's and now it seems we take for granted that Venezuela is a dictatorship and no one wants to do anything about it. So we will talk about Nicaragua. To all of my Nicaraguan friends, stay strong. We love you. We're here for you, to be your voices.
And of course, Edu, we also have our own fake elections in Venezuela in the upcoming weeks. So again, this is the same cancer that's causing the 3 dictatorships today in Latin America. And that's what we're going to talk about now with my friend Anaís Catalina. She's a Nicaraguan-American, and she has been speaking up for months, trying to warn the international community to not put the stamp of legitimacy in these fake elections. So let's talk to her now. Hi, Anaís. Welcome to From the North. Thank you so much for coming on our show on this very important day for Nicaragua.
Yes, it is. It's a very important date, actually. But thank you, both of you, for having me here. I'm excited.
Edu and I were just talking about, it is a sad day, a really sad day, not only for Nicaragua, but for the region. And welcome to the trio of dictatorships: Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela. The 3 dictatorships.
We did it.
We did it.
We did it, guys. They said they say that we couldn't have more dictatorships in the Americas. They were wrong.
And again, like we always say, 3 dictatorships connected by the same cancer that came from Cuba for 70 years ago. So, Anaís, tell us a little bit about the run-up to this. How did we get here where the Ortega-Muriillo regime is holding elections without opponents, without other political parties, and without any freedom or fairness? How did we get here?
I mean, it's a long trajectory, but I could just sum it up really quick from April 2018 to now. Well, basically in April 2018, it's what we call, the rebellion of the Nicaraguans in 2018, when civically and pacifically people went out to protest. And the goal at that time was to protest against the Social Security reforms that was happening. So the Ortega regime went ahead and they started to, threaten the elder people in Nicaragua. And since then, people were like, wait a minute, you're hurting elderly people. So people are started to join the protests, and then massive brutal repression happened and occurred. Approximately 300 people were murdered, but there may be more during this time. And then since then, Ortega has been, creating laws, jailing dissidents. People have been leaving to exile. But the laws that Ortega created within 2019, between mostly 2019 leading up to 2020, you have been very Orwellian Russian type laws, right? Like the gag laws. You can't be using your phone to talk about Ortega. And then the sovereignty law, right? That if you say anything in government, if you are running oppose him, then it's because you're threatening the sovereignty of the country, right? So those are really kind of leads up to where we are now. then comes this year, election year. What Ortega does, he uses those laws that he created, right, to sort of create the illusion that he is creating justice, right? So he creates these laws to be like, all right, so we're gonna, we're charging you with this sovereignty law, but everything is just, they just
Arbitrary.
came up with stuff to, I don't know, it's some weird magical realism that's happening. And then so then we get to where we are, maybe so it just all kind of leads, right, since the very January COVID and all that stuff. And then but Ortega has been really dismantling any political mobilization since 2018, but he really increases that late 2020, entering 2021, hiding it all the way up to election. I think what really surprised us Nicaraguans was the fact that he literally went to jail all opposition candidates, right? We were including myself, I was already expecting that, okay, of course, the elections are going to get rigged, they're going to be robbed, whatever, that's going to happen, that was going to happen. But the fact that he brutally went Aurelian style to jail all these
Right.
dissidents.
And that's what Edu and I talk about, because we're Venezuelans. We've seen the manual play out with the fake elections, but not even Maduro or Chavez, they're just put in jail every opponent.
And that's setting the bar incredibly low. That's setting the bar incredibly low.
Yeah, but he first went after the only woman presidential candidate, which was Cristiana Chamorro, which her
The
mom,
daughter, right?
yeah, the daughter of Violeta Chamorro that defeated Ortega back in the 90s. So that was the first one, and she's house arrested. And then he just went out full force. Like, he went after the other ones. He even went after his ex-ambassador for 2 years, which was Arturo Cruz, who in fact, and then he just goes after all these different dissidents. I mean, he even jailed somebody who helped him get out of jail during the time that he was when he was a prisoner during the Dictatorship Somoza, so he even jailed them. So he just went on full force.
And it wasn't only politicians, right? I've read that it's
bankers, people from the private sector,
student leaders, peasant leaders.
Student leaders and peasant leaders, of course. So he just went full on Orwellian. That to this point we were like, where, how, what? But we went up straight into this very Cold War, 1970s or dictatorships that we to this day we're not accustomed to seeing. But back in history, that's the way that he went, and nobody had seen this type of thing since the end of the Cold War, since the end of the dictatorships, and like even including Pinochet.
Yeah, and just kind of want to touch on that point, because it is, like you say, it's very Aurelian. But what's surprising to me has been that seeing this in the span of 7 months, 8 months, like less than a year, because in less than a year we have seen, if I'm not mistaken, the most prevalent 7 political opposition candidates that could have been a candidate against Ortega, as well as many peasant leaders, student leaders, and what have you. What's surprising to me, it's the inaction and of the entire international community. It seems that nobody cared about what happened. It didn't even reach headlines, and it's a big thing happening in our hemisphere. So why do you feel, I will have my answer for Venezuela, but why do you feel that the media, or I guess the general public, doesn't care as much about Nicaragua as to maybe what's happening in the other side of the world?
I think if we put into context in Central America, the fact that we're not ever put into the fraction that we are part of the Northern Triangle, because Nicaragua is not considered part of the Northern Triangle, right? And because for years, even while Ortega was in power, it was still considered one of the safest countries in Central America. So there was sort of this always normalization that even though Ortega was inside and in power since 2007, Nicaragua was the safest country. So, and also because Nicaragua has been relatively poor since the ending of Violeta, and then it goes into other, it's kind of like, just another poor country in Central America, right? But the fact that is also, and it also has to deal with like the romanticism and the mysticism that they have of the Sandinistas and the FSLN and the Revolutionary Party. Then also that also kind of grapples people to be like, wait a minute, hold up, why are you telling me that a strong man that defeated Somoza, which in fact did not occur that way, but is, what could he possibly do to the country? So there's this mysticism, there's romanticism towards this guy, towards this
And
this
that
strong man of
and that
Ortega,
brings me to my
that
second
people
point.
still can disassociate. And also because we have, and also Nicaraguans, even prior to 2018, we've never really migrated. So the fact that Salvadorans, Hondurans, and Guatemalans have migrated in caravans, but we haven't, and they
Now
have.
Nicaraguans are starting to, just like
Yeah,
Venezuelans.
now
Venezuelans,
we're
Cubans, and
forced to.
Nicaraguans are showing up at the U.S.-Mexico border.
And I think
Yeah, of
that
course.
kind of brings me to my other point: this romanticism that figures like Ortega, and I'm gonna extend it, fucking Castro, may he never rest in peace, Hugo Chavez, Maduro,
We did a whole
Guevara,
episode on the motherfucker.
Yeah,
fucking
of
Che
course.
Guevara. This romanticism.
But he first went after the only woman presidential candidate, which was Cristiana Chamorro, which her
The
mom,
daughter, right?
yeah, the daughter of Violeta Chamorro that defeated Ortega back in the 90s. So that was the first one, and she's house arrested. And then he just went out full force. Like, he went after the other ones. He even went after his ex-ambassador for 2 years, which was Arturo Cruz, who in fact, and then he just goes after all these different dissidents. I mean, he even jailed somebody who helped him get out of jail during the time that he was when he was a prisoner during the dictator Somoza, so he even jailed them. So he just went on full force.
And it wasn't
didn't
only
matter.
politicians, right? I've read
No,
that it's
bankers, people from the private sector, when he
student
started,
leaders, peasant leaders.
student leaders and peasant leaders, of course. So he just went full on Orwellian, that to this point we were like, where, how, what? But we went up straight into this very Cold War, 1970s or dictatorships that we to this day we're not accustomed to seeing. But back in history, that's the way that he went, and nobody had seen this type of thing since the end of the Cold War, since the end of dictatorships, and like even including Pinochet.
Yeah, and just kind of want to touch on that point because it is, like you say, it's very Aurelian. But what's surprising to me has been that seeing this in the span of 7 months, 8 months, like less than a year, because less than a year, in less than a year, we have seen, if I'm not mistaken, the most prevalent 7 political opposition candidates that could have been a candidate against Ortega, as well as many peasant leaders, student leaders, and what have you. What's surprising to me is the inaction and of the entire international community. It seems that nobody cared about what happened. It didn't even reach headlines, and it's a big thing happening in our hemisphere. So why do you feel? I will have my answer for Venezuela, but why do you feel that the media, or I guess the general public, doesn't care as much about Nicaragua as to maybe what's happening in the other side of the world?
I think if we put into context in Central America, the fact that we're not ever put into the fraction that we are part of the Northern Triangle, because Nicaragua is not considered part of the Northern Triangle, right? And because for years, even while Ortega was in power, it was still considered one of the safest countries in Central America. So there was sort of this always normalization that even though Ortega was inside in power since 2007, Nicaragua was the safest country. So, and also because Nicaragua has been relatively poor since the ending of Violeta, and then it goes into other, it's kind of like, just another poor country in Central America, right? But the fact that is also, and it also has to deal with like the romanticism and the mysticism that they have of the Sandinistas and the FSLN and the Revolutionary Party. then also that also kind of grapples people to be like, wait a minute, hold up, why are you telling me that a strong man that defeated Somoza, which in fact did not occur that way, but is, what could he possibly do to the country? So there's this mysticism, there's romanticism towards this guy, towards this strong man of
and that
Ortega,
brings me to my
that
second
people
point.
still can disassociate. And also because we have, and also Nicaraguans, even prior to 2018, we've never really migrated. So the fact that Salvadorans, Hondurans, and Guatemalans have migrated in caravans, but we haven't, and they have.
Nicaraguans are starting to, just like Venezuelans. Venezuelans, Cubans, and Nicaraguans are showing up at the U.S.-Mexico border.
And I think that kind of brings me to my other point: this romanticism that figures like Ortega, and I'm gonna extend it, fucking Castro, may he never rest in peace, Hugo Chavez, Maduro,
we did a whole episode on the motherfucker.
Fucking Che Guevara. This romanticism, I think its top exponent, I will say it that way, has to be the international observers that are not really international observers. They're just Americans, socialist Americans that are currently today in Nicaragua watching those elections. And
who are these people?
Who are these people?
I mean, you know what? Sometimes I really don't know who are these people, and I sometimes feel like, are you that bored? Like, are you really like that bored? I mean, that you have to do this, but in reality, I also have to blame, certain academics and sometimes academia, scholars, people who still teach the history of Nicaragua, promoting the romanticism and the mysticism that the revolution brings.
The Sandinistas in the first world is the same reason. They see the Castros as the same thing. They removed this really bad right-wing U.S. ally, also dictatorship. But at least, do you know, like, specifically, I just saw a picture of them. There are a bunch of gringos wearing gray vests saying that they're observing the elections. Do we know if they're connected to the DSA, to any organization in the U.S.?
They might. DSA has different factions, and DSA has different factions and different, clubs or whatever. I'm not sure how much it works. But I mean, that's the funny part thing, because twice actually, I spoke at a DSA event. And I spoke regarding. I did. I spoke regarding. I spoke because, the filmmaker of the documentary of Las Sandinistas, right? And it's based on women. And then, and she talks about like how, sort in the Sandinistas film, it talks about the failures that the revolution had towards women, right? So I went ahead and she invited me to go speak about the current situation that was happening right now. So I went, and then I remember I told the members of DSA, hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to go talk and I'm going to talk about what's going on right now. But don't put me in your pamphlet, because I'm specifically here just to advocate and to say what's going on, but I'm not here to endorse your political party. I mean, and the crowd was really like, kind of sort of confused what was going on. I went in there full force talking about that there were women in jail right now, and sort of the questions that people in the audience kept asking me was like, okay, but is the opposition going back to try to reincarnate the Sandinista revolution? And I was like, what?
Right. It's always the assumption that if you're against the current dictator, you want to go back to the previous dictator.
Yeah.
Like they were trying to figure out if the same struggles, like they were trying to figure out if the opposition was still following a certain way that the Sandinistas did in the in this the 60s all the way through the
Well, because
1979.
Americans here are also obsessed with the American support of the Contras in
Of
Nicaragua.
course,
They
yeah.
really hated that. They see it as, we were supporting the civil war in Nicaragua,
Yeah.
so they hold on to that to say that the U.S. should do nothing about this dictatorship being
Of
established.
course, but I mean, at the same time, who were financing the Sandinistas? It was Russia and Cuba, and
Oh, wait,
the
so
other side of Germany.
you're telling me that the socialists can also be imperialists?
I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, you know what I mean? So, I mean, who's still financing Nicaragua right now at this moment when in regards to
Russia.
like spies?
In relation to all of this, Anaís, I know you've also seen the news this week that progressive Democrats are mad at Hispanics because Hispanics didn't vote the way that they wanted them to in Virginia. So they're saying that
Yeah.
we Hispanics have a problem of white supremacy. But they're not talking about for the Renacer Act. Let's talk about that. And
Oh, okay.
the Congress. Well, first of all, tell me what the Renacer Act was, and then tell me why the hell the squad didn't support it, just like they didn't support Cuban protesters.
The Renacer Act is basically just a law, and the importance of the law is because it's a law directly towards a Central American country, right? It's focusing only on Nicaragua. And the law itself is just it's gonna open up more sanctions that it's gonna work in congruent with the Nica Act that we had. But I think, if not mistakenly, this Nica with this new Renacer Act, we're really looking for this Renacer Act to sanction the military, right? That they did participate in committing crimes against humanity. They are doing money laundering with the government. In fact, the military could actually, you know, play around with the bank institutions and figure out how much whatever. So, that's the ultimate, people are really pushing for, Renacer acts that way. It might hurt people. It's going to hurt people in the private sector, in the sense that some people in the private sector did have a fault in why Ortega is in power today, right? Because that's one thing Ortega did. He coddled up so much of the private sector that, whatever.
Chavez did the same thing. It's
Yeah,
It's
incredible
the
how
same
exactly,
similar it
playbook.
is.
exactly.
It's the
Yeah.
same playbook. It's
So,
horrible.
the Renacer is looking at towards that. It's also introducing more like vigilance towards, and more attention towards the fact that there's Russian spies in there. More attention of like advocating and figuring out, having more focus and try to figure out more focus and support regarding the rural area of Nicaragua, especially the indigenous land and the, all the stuff that happened there, because that area is usually heavy militarized. And it talks about other stuff. They're looking to pushing into the CAFTA, the trade act, and this is where everybody explodes, right? Should Nicaragua be out of the trade agreement, right, that we have, the CAFTA DR? And that's where you're gonna see that's why you'll have the Ocasios and the squad not support the Renacer Act, because they're like, wait a minute, you're gonna take away Nicaragua out of CAFTA. That means Nicaragua is gonna be messed up. Economic wise, it's not like,
Well, they're always against sanctions in general. So if
in
this
general,
act
yeah, they're
includes
always
any
against
kind of
sanctions.
sanctions, but
Yeah,
also, like we said, they also voted against a resolution that was it was just symbolic to support Cuban protesters, and they also
exactly.
voted against that. So it seems like what we were talking about this romanticizing of the Sandinistas and these revolutionaries, these people have made it to Congress now. It's the squad.
Which is crazy. I mean, I also find you're being a hypocrite, because didn't Ocasio did like a whole message towards Cuba, like showing her solidarity during the protests, right? Didn't she did that expose? I don't know. I
I
mean, I
mean,
didn't
she
really.
did it a little bit, but then she still blamed it on the embargo. So,
But she shied away, right?
I,
And then that's my problem. Like, when it comes to atrocities, like in Ortega, you're committing crimes against humanity. I mean, you're really just gonna like not say anything.
it
I mean,
seems to me that their position towards geopolitics, or what they want to portray to the world, is that the United States should just do nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely
But I mean,
nothing.
it's so contradictory that they say, well, we should not do nothing. But when you have, even like in the case of Central America, when you have El Salvador or Guatemala, like, okay, they could do something there, but they can't say do something in Nicaragua just because the government is supposedly left leaning, supposedly socialist, or
Right, because the Squad support. I always bring up this example. They support sanctions against Israel.
Oh, they
I don't know
love
why.
sanctioning
Yeah.
Israel. But sanction Nicaragua? Sanction Venezuela? Sanction Cuba? No.
So these tankies, because that's what they are. The Squad, they're tankies. They always say, that people, Anaís, like you and Edu and I, who promote the cause for freedom in our countries, that we're not really representative of our countries because we live in the U.S. Because
I'm born here, but yeah.
Right. And so tell us what real Nicaraguans want, because Edu and I know that Venezuelans want sanctions against the Chavista regime. We want the U.S. to help us out. So what are Nicaraguans thinking? What do they want? And what do you want to tell first worlders that they should understand about the issue that your country is going through?
I mean, it's like I always tell people, you gotta stop looking at issues like the case of Nicaragua through the context of the Cold War. I mean, you gotta stop looking at Nicaragua in the context of the U.S. or whatever privilege you're sitting on here in the U.S. I mean, look at the context of what the people are actually saying. If they're telling you they're killing us and there's no election, then damn best believe it that there's no election. Like just shut up and believe it.
Right, it's like, why would we lie about this? They always tell us why would I lie that like my country has fallen in a horrible, tragic hole? Like, what?
And then when they want to, and the funny thing is that when they want to prove that what you're saying is wrong, then what are they going to quote you? They're going to quote you Telesur, which is paid for the Venezuelan regime.
By the way, gray zone is in Nicaragua right now, of course, to say the elections are real.
It's so funny. I can't see any of the gray zone tweets because I'm blocked.
God bless you.
I've been blocked by the gray zone maybe for like a year now, so I'm like, yeah.
Well, there they
are. Like screenshots of people, and then obviously whatever Knockloud took out today. But yeah, I always tell like first worlders, and I have my issues with many, even within the Central American community. You guys oust us out. Like, you cannot claim that there could be a Central American solidarity if you continue to put away Nicaragua. And I know, right? Yeah, if there cannot be a Pan-Americanism or Central Americanism if the fact that you, as my neighbor in Central America, or you as my, if you're another Salvadoran, Honduran, or Guatemalan, or whatever, and you're quiet about the Nicaraguan dictatorship because it goes against your aesthetic, that you're left-leaning just because you were born here and your parents fled the country, then it's completely bullcrap for me. Because your neighbor Nicaraguans are literally dying, have no elections. I mean, the fact that we have two Salvadorans, so we have Mauricio Funes and we have Sanchez Seren in there. The fact that they got Nicaraguan citizenships and they voted today for Ortega shows a lot of. As a Salvadoran, you should be calling that out.
Whoa.
Jesus
I thought,
Christ.
I thought, isn't that inherismo? Because the fact that there are so many Nicaraguans that can't go back to Nicaragua right now, and Nicaragua and Ortega gave free citizenship to these to these Salvadorans, right?
That's what they did in Venezuela to Cubans too. They would give them the citizenship. And I was just saying, you mentioning, Anaís, that there are Nicaraguans who aren't allowed back in Nicaragua for these elections.
Yeah, I probably can't even enter. I probably can't even pick up a flight because, if I'm not mistaken, they have registro migratoria. So they're gonna, it works that way, the government or whatever tells the airline, okay, who are the people coming in and blah. And Anaís Gonzalez, U.S. citizen. What about the Google me when I get there?
They already did. They didn't allow Nicaraguan journalists who live abroad to go back to cover the elections.
Exactly. And then And then, so like for me, it's like, of course, if so I've heard so many Central American critics say, but Nicaraguans, the whatever, or there's a reason why Nicaraguans are gonna go in line with Venezuelans and Cubans, right? Or because
Welcome
you
to the
guys are
club.
not
They're gonna
really
hate you now
supporting
too.
us. Like,
We're not, what do you call, the inadequate minorities, because they don't
Be-
like our suffering.
because our talking points goes against what they have to say, goes against their policy, goes against the
exactly.
ideology. Yeah.
And then that's my problem that I sometimes have within the Central American community here or in general. It's the fact that, okay, yeah, the moment that you're like, oh, you're Nicaraguan, ooh, be careful, or be careful for what? I have
You get
nothing.
that too, because we
Yeah.
Venezuelans and Cubans, they literally say we're the bad Hispanics.
Yeah.
And they're trying to pit Latins against other Latins just for political
Yeah.
reasons. And
Yeah,
that's fucked.
exactly.
That's so fucked. And we were just talking about that on the editorial. But it seems that...
And it goes back to why Hispanics vote a certain way, because
Exactly.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. We have a Democratic Party that you're supposed to be knowledgeable of what's happening in the region, Latin American region, but you decide because of whatever your aesthetic, your persona, whatever you want to put up into the world, you don't want to support or listen to us because it doesn't fit your aesthetic. So that means you're not being apolitical.
That just reminded me, the Renacer Act did pass in spite of the squad being little bitches about it,
Yeah.
but Joe Biden wouldn't sign it because he said he didn't want it to be seen as U.S. interference in the fake election.
Fucking Christ. Jesus
I saw that and I was like, you're kidding me. But but I'm like, okay, literally the Democratic Party has an issue. They have an issue. They're very timid and they're very shy when it comes to dealing with Nicaragua, Venezuela. They know it's wrong. Secretary of State Blinken knows it's wrong. Biden knows it's wrong.
The moderates
they know
know. The moderates know.
they know it's wrong, but they're so worried about
Their image.
what people are
That's
gonna
what I
say.
get, because I'm telling them what they should be worried about is that their image is that they care way too much about what the squad thinks.
And that's...
Yeah, and that's one issue that the Democratic Party seems like it's having. It's they're trying to do this bipartisanship, but then you have the squad that are like, "Ah!" And it's like, okay, it was really like, okay, nobody really goes that way, but whatever. And then you have your good Democrats that actually are concerned and they're like, okay, and they'll listen to you. And then Biden comes and he decides not to fight, and I'm like, you're just kind of giving the dictatorship more oxygen. Like, just sign it.
The sign it, exactly. And that it comes to, again, we circle back to it. We have an issue of speaking specifically about Cubans, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans in this context, but it applies to different contexts for different nationalities. But
Yeah.
a lot of us are coming into the United States because we're fleeing from a fucking dictatorship. And when we finally become citizens, and then we have the right to go to polls, and then we have the right to go to elections, how on anyone's mind, from any person that has lived in Cuba, has lived in Venezuela, has lived in Nicaragua, how are you going to convince them to vote for your party if you have people in your party, in your caucus, actively working against the people of Nicaragua, against the people of Cuba, and against the people of Venezuela? And instead of reflecting on what they're doing, instead of saying, okay, we fucked up, let's review what we're doing, let's see how we can get your support back again, they just double down, and then they call us racist. They want us to fight amongst ourselves. They want Cubans, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans to be ostracized from the Hispanic community.
They're the ones who were Republic. There's a reason why. Words matter. If that specific party is saying we are in liberty, man, estamos con whatever, estamos con el pueblo de Nicaragua, Venezuela, y Cuba. And if Latinos hear that, our people, well, they're gonna want to vote for them because why you're mentioning their countries. Now, the Democratic Party has a very good they do a very good job in looking and giving the message forward towards the Northern Triangle. I am not the Northern Triangle. Yes, we are part of Central America, but we're not the Northern Triangle. Like, the fact that there's a dictatorship near the countries of the Northern Triangle should concern you, because if these governments like Honduras or even Guatemala, in the case of Honduras, where you have Juan Orlando, who's known for narcotraficante, right? These are hybrid governments. What about if they make a pact with Ortega, because Juan Orlando's brother is already in the day, he's already jailed for, if I'm not mistaken, for drug trafficking. What about they make a pact with Ortega? That's how dangerous Ortega is, because I don't think Juan Orlando cares that he's right wing. What he cares is saving his
None
ass.
of these people care whether they're right wing or left wing.
They are a threat to the national security, not only of the United States,
region, yes,
but every single country in the region. And failing to notice this, it's only gonna harm the United States in the long run. So it's not only playing against the interest of millions of people that are being oppressed by these regimes, it's also playing against the interest of the American people.
Exactly. It shows a bad example. What could happen? Oh, well, if Ortega, nobody paid attention to Ortega all these years, well, why can't I? And in Latin America,
actually, I think Ortega is a continuation of everything. When Chavez started little by little, no one did anything. Now Ortega is doing it even bigger. Oh, no one did anything with Chavez. I'm straight up gonna put every opponent in jail, and no one did anything. So basically, Anaís, where do Nicaraguans go now?
Good question.
Why does the battle move on to next?
Well, I mean, it's unfortunate that until now, they're calling Nicaragua a dictatorship. I mean, that should have, if we wanted to put titles, that should have been the number one since the moment that since the Nicaraguans were brutally being repressed during crackdown.
Which, by the way, when you were talking about that, I wanted to remind people that's like one of few times we have seen Nicaragua on the news, because the scenes were brutal. Am I remembering this right, that there were students like stuck in a university because the military was like waiting to massacre them?
Yeah, there was the attack on July 13, if I'm not mistaken. It lasted almost 19 hours straight, where it was just like,
Jesus.
To a university, right?
To a university.
Where it was just straight up just firearms towards the civilians, and then the witch hunt, Operación Limpieza, right, where they just went poof into the different territories in Nicaragua, just cleaning out the dissidents, jailing them, and then protests became illegally banned in October of 2018. The brutal crackdown and the repression that occurred in April 2010, and I don't want to compare dictatorships, but it was more brutal than the ones that we have been seeing in Venezuela.
Yeah, it is. Just by the numbers, you mentioned 300 people have been murdered.
300 approximately, yeah.
So it's brutal. It's as brutal as it gets. I would go ahead and say it's the most brutal dictatorship currently.
Of course, it is. It's a brutal dictatorship. I mean, technically there's 300, right, that the human rights are gonna say, but obviously you have deaths that are not reported, you have assassinations that are not reported, easily 500 plus during this time of the brutal repression.
Jesus. Well, at least I can tell you have friends in Venezuela, you have friends in Cuba. If first worlders don't want to listen to what you have to say, if other Central Americans don't listen to what you have to say, be confident that we do want to listen to what you have to say, because it just feels horribly similar to what we've been through.
No, it is similarity. They work. I mean, and it goes back to Hermania says, what do we do now? Because Venezuela has 20 years approximately, right? Nicaragua, it all depends on the generation that you talk to. So right now we're gonna, if you talk to somebody that's elder, they're gonna be like, Ortega has been in power since 40 years, right? Because they also include when Ortega was governing from beneath. And then some people right now are gonna say he's entering 12, 14, 15 years. So what, 2007?
Consecutive. Yeah.
This is his fourth consecutive term, and that's counting the 1984 one.
Jesus.
So what do we do from now? Like, what do I do from now? What do I say?
We don't know.
What do
Nobody
I
knows.
say?
But at least we're here and we can
Nobody
talk
knows.
shit
I mean,
about
you
it.
know, exactly. Just
Well,
continue
we can
drinking as
tell
much.
you from our experience that it does suck that it took this long and this blatant authoritarianism for the world to recognize that Nicaragua is a dictatorship. But now that they have officially, I do think things will move more internationally. Like in Venezuela,
Yeah.
we did see that happening. Like what was it, the Court of Human Rights?
La Corte Penal
Yes,
Internacional, the
yes,
international, the ICC, International Criminal Court, has opened finally an official investigation on Venezuela. Hopefully, that will be the future for Nicaragua, because if Venezuela has committed crimes against humanity, God knows that Nicaragua has done the same. So
It officially has done the same.
yeah.
But I guess, I mean, from now, like I think the number one importance that we have to continue doing is just denouncing these regimes, continue, trying to debunk the mythicism and the romanticism all these people have towards the regime. I think that's the number one goal.
And
I
that,
mean, that's my number one thing. Whenever I hear something, I'm like, no,
totally. We
it
have to
doesn't go
do
that way.
it. I mean, that's how I met both of you, and now we're like
Mhm.
good friends because the three of us were each on our own side, like telling tankies, no, actually, Chavez wasn't good. And Anaís also, just like we all do, because Cubans, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans, it's the same cancer. So we can so easily understand what happened to each of our countries. And every time I see someone praising Ortega, it's the same to me as if they were praising Chavez. I will come in there and speak my truth. And it's interesting because here, you have the first world tankies that go out in support of the regimes, and here in Miami, they had the audacity to go out to support the freedom of Alex Saab. I don't know if you heard of. Alex Saab is the main money launderer for Chavismo. And what do you see whenever these tankies get together? They always have an image of Che Guevara.
Free drugs, bro.
Right. No, but they have an image of Che Guevara, a Sandinista flag, and a Venezuelan flag.
Free Alex Saab. Free Alex Saab. So I believe the answer is, if they want to fight to bring us apart, then we should fight to bring us together. So I feel we should start looking at this as not three similar struggles, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, but the same struggle.
Yeah, and I always advocate for that. I'm like, okay, if you're gonna have a forum, it cannot just be Cuba, and it cannot just be Venezuela. It has to be all. Bring those three babies in, right? Bring those three toy containers.
Yeah, exactly. That's the John Bolton term. But honestly, it's true. And we're going to see these three dictators support each other till the death. So we also have to unite against them in any way we can.
Well, guys, it has been an amazing conversation. Thank you for joining From the North, episode 10, with the very amazing Anaís, straight up from Nicaragua. No, she lives in the United States.
No, from Cali. I'm from LA.
From Cali, but she's Nicaraguan by blood. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned, guys. We will be, you bet your ass, we'll be covering what's going on in Nicaragua and Venezuela and Cuba.
On fake elections too in a few weeks, so.
That's right.
Chocolate. Alright, take it easy, guys. Bye.
Bye.